Well, I'm happy to have Mr. Ryan Derda join us to talk a little bit about gold and silver. He is the Vice President of American Independence Gold. Mr. Derda, thank you so much for joining us. I have so many questions for you. I think when people are inundated with messages about gold and silver, um, what is it about you and your background that you think people should know if they're going to buy gold from you, why they should?
Oh, it's a great question. Um, I got sent down a rabbit hole many years ago to learn the history of gold and silver and monetary history. And that rabbit hole came as a result of one of the economists that I studied early on in my career was so spot on about so many topics except gold and silver. He kept getting it wrong all the time. And I was so intrigued of why is it he's so good and so accurate on so many topics. He keeps getting this one wrong. And that's literally what made me open the doors to say, I have to figure this out. Right. And what I came to learn, honestly, just through all my experience and my study, and I think I became a little obsessive in studying why he was wrong and learning about gold and silver. He was simply looking at it through the wrong lens. And when I discovered he was looking at it through the wrong lens, that changed everything. And when I say he was looking at it through the wrong lens, he was viewing gold and silver just as commodities because in the Wall Street system, gold and silver are labeled as commodities,
Right.
whereas historically and per our Constitution, gold and silver by definition are money.
Okay, so what's the difference? Because that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Well, money, commodity. What is the difference?
Sure. So let me first define money versus currency. Okay. So they carry the same attributes, right? So both money and currency are a medium of exchange. Okay. And then I give
Yep.
people just to help them recall or remember, just think of like a PDF file. Okay. They're portable,
Okay.
durable, divisible, and fungible. However, what sets money apart from currency is by definition, money is a store of value over time versus the currency, the dollars that we carry in our pocket do not hold value. They're a deflationary, excuse me, an inflationary liability. So over time, as more and more currency is created, the purchasing power of that currency weakens versus
So
gold and silver
because
store value.
obviously, right? Because we always talk about you hear about printing money in D.C. They just keep printing money, and that makes the value obviously go down when there's more of it. So gold and silver are finite, correct? I mean, we know across the globe is they're a finite resource.
They're a finite resource in the sense that there's only so much gold and silver above ground, right? And new discoveries
Right.
are made for mining new gold and silver to bring it up out of the ground. But there's a workload that goes into that, right? So if there's a new mine discovered, they don't start producing out of that mine for a decade, right?
Okay.
Existing mines, you have to dig, you've got to mine. Then from there's a whole logistic supply chain that goes with that. It then has to be, refined and then smelted and then minted into products. So
Right.
if you look at it through the sense of gold and silver will always have an inflationary floor because as the currency loses purchasing power, the cost of mining continues to go up. And as the cost of mining continues to go up, by default, what happens to the value of gold and silver? It must go up.
Interesting. Is that the lens that your economist friend was forgetting?
I think so. Again, he was primarily looking at it just as a commodity metal. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by just as a commodity metal. So that this particular economist used historical trends and cycles. So he was combining gold and silver into his commodity cycle, right? And his commodity cycle was accurate, with the exception of gold and silver's role in that cycle, because silver, for example, is the second most consumed commodity in the world, second to crude oil. However, most of the silver that's been mined out of the ground today, 80% of it is gone, because it goes in electronics. It goes in everything that we use every single day.
Yeah.
You can't have a pot of coffee this morning without silver, right? But another part that I believe is highly overlooked, is, besides just the everyday use of it being a commodity metal, it's also highly used in the military industrial complex. So, for example, a Tomahawk cruise missile has 400 ounces of silver in every warhead,
Wow.
right? And think about how many of those are firing off around the world right now. And that silver we're never getting back.
It it's not coming back. In other words, those warheads can't be recycled. That silver can't be reclaimed.
Exactly. It's blown up
I'd
into
like
the
to believe
ground.
it can.
Yeah, no, blown
Okay.
up into the ground.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's means. I'm sure, if you go to throw away a laptop computer, you know that there's recycle centers where you can go and take it. I learned many years
Yeah,
ago.
I'm sure should have thought of that.
There you go. Something I found fascinating many years ago. When I say many years ago, this was before I ever entered the world of finance. I actually had an old client who had, that's what he did. He recycled precious metals. And one of the parts that I found interesting is X-ray film. The back of X-ray film, they wash it, and they wash all the silver off and refine it and turn it back into precious metals bars. And
Wow.
right, that was interesting.
Wow. That is interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating field. And like I said, people are inundated with messages about investing in gold and silver. Let me make it a little more timely, if I can, Mr. Derda. We've just had an election, November 5th, Donald Trump, pretty much overwhelmingly, right? We could
Right.
call it a landslide since it was the popular and the electoral vote. How is that, his coming administration, do you think, going to impact gold and silver?
So let me start by saying that one of the first major impacts recently to the gold and silver market was from the previous administration, right? They sanctioned Russia for going into Ukraine. And when they did that, they in essence prohibited Russia from using the US dollar. And their intention was to try to crash the Russian economy. But it didn't play out that way. And part of the reason why it didn't play out that way was because in a strategic move, Putin, in essence, backed the ruble by gold and began to accept trade for oil, example, in gold settlement. So this is one of the reasons why we've seen now the price of gold steadily increase over the last several years with very few pullbacks. Because in essence, what happened is now the world has been completely divided in global trade. And we now have potentially competing with the US dollar as the dominant global reserve currency, the BRICS nations and the proposed BRICS currency in global trade settlement. And what has made that BRICS currency attractive is that it's ultimately redeemable by gold. Now, it hasn't been officially launched, so a lot of it is just information that comes out from finance ministers and planning and so on and so forth. But under the surface, all the payment rails are in place for there to be a a means of global trade from the East versus the West. So to get to the, you know, direct answer to your question, my biggest concern with what could play out with Trump stepping in is he's talking about 100% tariffs on
Yeah.
the BRICS nations. And I think Donald Trump is a genius businessman. But I studied economics for almost 20 years now, and I've been trying to wrap my head around how is this good, right? And again, trying to think from the mind of Donald Trump because he plays 5D chess, right?
Yeah, he does.
My concern, my initial concern is what we're gonna see at first, is we're probably going to see inflation worsen initially if these tariffs are in fact imposed, right? Because in essence, what it's going to create are trade wars, right? Well, those trade wars will then create more global uncertainty. And as a result of this global uncertainty, it further creates the divide of the East versus the West. And if we look at what's been taking place on a global economic scale and through the lens of the global central banks, we've seen the global central banks, especially the Eastern central banks, dumping their exposure to U.S. Treasuries and in turn filling their bank balance sheets with physical gold. And recently, Russia announced that they're going to be adding silver to their bank balance sheets alongside gold as a monetary metal. So when we watch these actions taking place between the East versus the West and the global central banks, yeah, it creates concern in the sense that the BRICS, the current BRICS conglomerate, is a total of 9 countries, and they have 13 confirmed trading partners. Now, of this conglomerate, their total GDP is $10 trillion greater than the US. Their population is 4.5 billion people, so more than half the world. And they produce 60% of all the commodities, all the things that we use. They produce the majority of it. So when we start trying to threaten them with, well, you can't trade with us anymore unless you pay this exorbitant tax, my concern moving forward is that, okay, they simply say, well, we don't want to play in your sandbox anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We have all the means to not have to trade in your US dollar. We can trade oil outside of the US dollar. We can trade food outside of the US dollar, electronics from China, natural gas, you name it. They have all the means to basically say to us, okay, well, if you want to tariff us 100%, then we're just not going to use your dollar anymore. So I'm curious to see how that ultimately plays out. But at the end of the day, because of that uncertainty, it's only going to drive more people at a global level into gold and silver until this is figured out.
And that, until this is figured out. And that's where I want to wind up with you here. And we will have you back. But I want to finish with this question because listeners, I think, are very curious. Like I said, there are so many places they can go to purchase gold and silver. Uh, Clearly, you're in the weeds of knowing all of these ins and outs. And with that extensive knowledge, I feel like this is why I lend my name to you and endorse you. But in general terms, what's the biggest benefit for people right now of investing in gold and or silver?
Insurance, financial insurance. To put it simple, there's $36 trillion in debt. We have an unsustainable debt problem, right?
Yeah, we do.
So that leads to historically debt default or hyperinflation of a currency. In either one of those scenarios, that doesn't bode well for the stock market. It doesn't bode well for any Wall Street institution. So there's sizable risk that exists inside the Wall Street machine. Gold and silver give people the opportunity to move out of harm's way into a safe haven asset. Gold is classified as a tier 1 asset, which is a definition by the central banks that means it is the safest thing that you can own. And with taking a look at that definition, the safest thing that you can own is the third best performing asset in all of 2024.
This is great information, and I want to encourage people to go to the website AmericanIndependenceGold.com and find out for themselves. Any other tip you want to give our listeners as to how they might get in touch with you and what they might ask and what their first move should be?
Sure, absolutely. Let's start with points of contact. They can call us directly at 833-324-GOLD. That's 833-324-4653. They can send us an email at info@AmericanIndependenceGold.com. Obviously, they can visit the website. And then last but not least, they can text the word gold to 717-767.
717-767. That's
That
what
is
we
correct.
that's text the word gold and you'll get some free information. It's so worth your time, the investment of the very few minutes it takes to get started in this. And I encourage everyone to start with American Independence Gold. These people know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. Obviously, as you just heard from Mr. Ryan Derda. I appreciate you coming on so much. I'm looking forward to the next time.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for having me.